At 7:14 p.m., my phone buzzed on the white linen tablecloth of our favorite corner booth. It was a message from Claire. "Hey babe, stuck at the gallery with a last-minute client. Going to be working late. Don't wait up for dinner. Love you." I was just about to signal the waiter to cancel our anniversary reservation when the brass bell above the entrance chimed. I looked up, and my heart didn't just stop. It felt like it had been physically seized. Claire walked in, looking more elegant than I'd ever seen her, her chestnut hair catching the candlelight. She wasn't alone. She was draped in the arms of a man in a sharp charcoal suit, laughing at something he whispered in her ear as they moved toward a secluded booth in the back. I started to stand up, my chair scraping harshly against the floor, ready to demand an explanation. But before I could take a single step, a hand gripped my shoulder. I turned to see a young waiter with alert, tense eyes. He leaned in close, pretending to refill my water, and slid a folded napkin onto the table. "Don't look up," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the restaurant's jazz. "She's not who you think. If you go over there now, you lose everything. Sit down, Mr. Cole. The real story is just beginning." I am so grateful you've joined me to hear how I navigated the most complex structural failure of my life. If this story resonates with you or makes you rethink the foundations of your own relationships, please let me know in the comments. I'm curious to know where you are watching from. What city or country are you tuning in from today? Before we continue, a quick note. While this story uses fictional elements to protect the identities involved, the lessons regarding intuition and the precision of betrayal are very real. Now, let me tell you how it all started. It was October 12th, a crisp Tuesday that marked exactly 7 years since Claire and I exchanged vows in a glass-walled chapel overlooking the Pacific. As an architect, I've always believed that if the foundation is solid, the building can withstand any storm. That morning, I had woken up at 5:30 a.m., carefully brewing Claire's favorite roast and leaving a handwritten note on the kitchen island. I spent the afternoon at my firm, putting the finishing touches on the blueprints for the most sensitive government project of my career, fueled by the thought of our anniversary dinner. I wanted that night to be a celebration of the perfect life we had built together, a structure I thought was indestructible. I had no idea that by dessert, I would be watching the woman I loved systematically dismantle every brick of my reality. I sank back into the plush leather of the booth, the weight of Evan's hands still lingering on my shoulder like a physical anchor. My heart was a frantic metronome against my ribs, but I forced my breathing to slow, rhythmic, and shallow, the way I did when I was calibrating a difficult sight measurement. I lifted the heavy, gold-embossed menu, shielding my face just enough to disappear into the shadows of the corner. Across the room, bathed in the soft, deceptive amber of the overhead chandelier, was Claire. She looked radiant, a masterpiece of poise. She leaned toward the stranger, her hand resting briefly on his forearm, a gesture so familiar it made my stomach churn. That was the hand that had held mine this morning. That was the same tilt of the head she used when she was telling me she was proud of my work. Evan moved with a practiced, invisible grace. He appeared at my side again, his movements fluid as he adjusted the silverware he had already straightened. "Don't look directly at him," he murmured, his eyes fixed on a spot just above my head. "The man in the charcoal suit is Marcus Thorne. He's been here 3 times this week. Every time, he arrives 10 minutes after she does. They always take booth 14. It's the only one out of the security camera's line of sight." I gripped the edge of the table. My architect's mind began to overlay the restaurant's floor plan with this new, jagged information. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was a surveyor looking at a structural collapse. "Thorne," I whispered, the name tasting like ash. I knew that name. He was the lead developer for the rival firm currently bidding against us for the city's new high-security archive. "He thinks he's the one in control," Evan said, flicking a stray crumb off the tablecloth with a white linen cloth. "But watch her hands, Mr. Cole. She's the one directing the conversation. She's been checking her watch every 4 minutes. She's on a schedule." As if on cue, Claire laughed, a bright, silver sound that used to be my favorite thing in the world. She reached into her clutch, the one I'd bought her for our 5th anniversary, and slid a small, silver thumb drive across the table. Thorne covered it with his palm immediately, his eyes darting around the room. The betrayal wasn't just romantic, it was a clinical, calculated demolition. She wasn't just cheating on me, she was raiding the vault of our life. The working late texts, the memory vitamins, the subtle comments about how I seemed stressed and forgetful lately, it all snapped into a terrifyingly clear alignment. "She's getting up," Evan warned, his voice a sharp blade of reality. "Stay down. If she sees you now, the foundation breaks before you can trap her." I lowered my head, staring at the empty anniversary plate in front of me. I watched her reflection in the darkened window as she stood, smoothed her dress, and leaned in to kiss Thorne's cheek. It was a cold, professional movement. As she walked toward the exit, passing within 10 feet of my booth, I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just waited for the door to chime, marking the moment I stopped being the man she deceived and started being the architect of her undoing. The cool night air hit my face like a splash of ice water as I pushed through the heavy service door. The alleyway behind the restaurant was a narrow canyon of brick and damp asphalt, smelling of rain and discarded citrus. I stood there, my hands trembling as I leaned against the cold wall, trying to reconcile the elegant woman I'd married with the shadow I'd just seen in booth 14. A moment later, the door creaked open again. Evan stepped out, his waiter's vest unbuttoned, the sharp professional mask he'd worn at the table finally slipping. He looked around cautiously before joining me in the dim glow of a single overhead security light. "I shouldn't be doing this," he said, his voice low and raspy. "But I've watched you come in here for years, Mr. Cole. You're a decent man. And what she's doing, it's not just an affair. It's a blueprint for a hit." "What are you talking about, Evan?" I asked, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "You said she's not who I think she is." Evan leaned closer, his eyes darting toward the street. "Your wife doesn't just come here with Marcus Thorne. For the last 4 months, she's been a regular on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. But she's never Claire Cole when she walks through that door. To the staff on the day shift, she's Elena, a high-end art consultant. To the men she meets, and there have been 3 others besides Thorne, she's whatever they need her to be. I've seen her swap SIM cards in her phone like she was changing earrings." The air in my lungs felt thin. I thought of the gallery she claimed to run, the long hours she spent curating private collections that never seemed to result in a physical show. It wasn't a business, it was a theater. The others, I managed to say. "Who were they?" "Corporate types," Evan replied, his jaw tight. "One was a city auditor. Another was a logistics lead for a defense contractor. They all have one thing in common. They hold keys to things people want to steal. She plays them. She finds their pressure points, she charms them into a corner, and then she leaves them with a thumb drive or a signed NDA they can't explain." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper, a duplicate of a reservation slip. "Last Tuesday, she was here with a man named Sterling. She introduced herself as an insurance investigator. She's a chameleon, Mr. Cole. She's been building a life in the cracks of yours, using this restaurant as her staging ground because she knew you only ever came here on special occasions. The precision of it was what hurt the most. As an architect, I knew that the most dangerous cracks aren't the ones on the surface. They're the ones deep in the foundation, hidden by a beautiful facade." "Why tell me now?" I asked. Evan looked at the service door, then back at me. "Because I saw her face tonight when she handed over that drive. There was no hesitation. No guilt. She looked like she was finally finishing a job. If she's done with the job, Mr. Cole, she's probably done with you too. Would you like me to write Chapter 3, where Adrian returns home to audit his own life and discovers the digital trail of Claire's high-stakes betrayal?" I drove home in a state of hypervigilance, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard the leather groaned. Every taillight in the rearview mirror felt like a tail. Every shadow in the suburbs felt like a structural flaw I had failed to account for. When I pulled into our driveway, the house looked the same, an elegant, mid-century modern structure with floor-to-ceiling glass that I had designed to be a sanctuary of transparency. Now, it looked like a cage built of two-way mirrors. Claire's car wasn't in the garage. I slipped inside, the silence of the foyer ringing in my ears like a fire alarm. I didn't turn on the lights. Instead, I navigated the familiar hallways by touch until I reached my home office. My architect's workstation sat in the corner, its triple monitors dark and cold. I sat down and logged into the firm's private VPN. As an architect on a government contract, our security protocols were supposed to be impenetrable. I opened the system logs for the Aegis project, the high-security government archive I'd been designing for 18 months. My pulse thundered in my throat as I filtered the access history by IP address. There was a ghost in the machine. For the last 3 months, a user had been logging into the server from my home network. The timestamps were chillingly consistent. 2:30 a.m., 3:15 a.m., for AM times when I was deep in sleep, likely aided by the vitamins Claire had been so diligently placing on my nightstand. The ghost user hadn't just been browsing. They had been systematically exporting the structural schematics, the HVAC ventilation routes, and the biometric sensor placements. The digital footprint was clever. It used my own credentials, but the navigation pattern was wrong. I was an architect. I moved through a file following the flow of the foundation. This user moved like a predator, jumping straight to the vulnerabilities. Straight to the cracks, where a person could slip in undetected. I felt a wave of nausea. She hadn't just stolen my heart or my trust, she was using my professional reputation as a Trojan horse. If these blueprints were leaked or used in a security breach, the investigation would lead straight back to this room. Straight back to my keyboard. I leaned back, the blue light of the monitor washing over my face. I looked at the wedding photo on my desk, Claire smiling in that glass chapel. I realized then that she hadn't married a man, she had married an access point. My perfect wife was a high-level corporate fixer, and I was her most successful heist. I heard the distant hum of the garage door opening. Claire was home. I didn't close the laptop. I didn't move. I simply sat in the dark, watching the ghost user's last exit timestamp, realizing that the woman walking through my front door wasn't coming home to her husband, she was coming back to the scene of the crime. Would you like me to write Chapter 4, where Adrian visits Claire's gallery and discovers it's nothing more than a hollow stage for her operations? The next morning, I didn't go to my firm. Instead, I drove to the gentrified district of the city, where the Cole Contemporary Gallery sat nestled between a boutique coffee shop and a high-end jeweler. The storefront was a masterpiece of minimalist design, all brushed steel and vast, unblemished glass. I had helped her pick the lease. I had even sketched the interior layout for her, thinking I was supporting my wife's passion for rising artists. I used my spare key to slip inside. The air was cool and smelled of expensive floor wax and nothing else. On the walls hung 3 large, abstract canvases, splashes of gray and muted blue that looked like they had been purchased from a hotel liquidator. There were no price tags, no catalogs, and no sign of the frantic energy that usually precedes a gallery opening. I moved toward the back office, my shoes clicking rhythmically on the polished concrete. Claire's desk was a slab of white marble, perfectly organized. I pulled open the drawers. They were empty, save for a few generic stationery sets. There were no invoices from shippers, no contracts with artists, no correspondence with collectors. It was a showroom for a ghost. I noticed a small, recessed panel in the wall behind her desk, a detail I hadn't included in my original sketches. My fingers found the seam, and with a light press, the panel clicked open. Inside wasn't a collection of sketches, but a rack of high-end, discreet tech, signal jammers, a professional-grade burner phone charger, and a series of folders organized by name. I pulled one out. It wasn't labeled with an artist's name. It was labeled with a project title, Aegis 7. Inside were candid photos of me. Photos of me at my firm, me at the coffee shop, and me entering the high-security site. There were also dossiers on my colleagues, their debt histories, their family pressures, their weaknesses. My wife wasn't an art consultant, she was a social engineer, and this gallery was nothing more than a blind, a sterile stage where she could meet her handlers away from the prying eyes of our domestic life. I realized then that every sale she had celebrated with a bottle of champagne was likely a milestone in a corporate espionage campaign. The rising stars she talked about were just targets. She hadn't been curating art. She had been curating me, shaping my environment and my schedule until I was the perfect, unsuspecting conduit for her theft. As I stood in that hollow, beautiful room, I felt the final traces of the man I used to be, the trusting husband, evaporate. I closed the panel and wiped my fingerprints from the marble. I didn't need to destroy this place. I just needed to understand its structure. Claire thought she was the one holding the blueprints, but she had forgotten that an architect knows how to find the hidden rooms in any house he helped build. The digital clock on the nightstand flickered to 2:14 a.m., casting a rhythmic, ghostly blue pulse across our bedroom. I lay perfectly still, my body heavy with the feigned weight of deep exhaustion. I had mastered the art of the shallow, rhythmic breath, the slow expansion of the chest that signaled a man lost in a sedative-induced dream. Beside me, the mattress shifted with the subtlety of a predator adjusting its stance. Claire didn't move for a long time. She was testing the air, listening for the slightest break in my cadence. My skin crawled with the urge to flinch, to reach out and demand to know who she really was, but I remained an unmoving part of the furniture. Finally, she slid out from under the duvet. She didn't turn on a light. She didn't need to. She moved through the room with the practiced silence of someone who had mapped every floorboard's protest. I watched through the slit of my eyelashes, a narrow, blurry aperture of betrayal. She reached for my nightstand, her hand hovering over my encrypted work phone. She didn't try to guess the passcode. She was far more surgical than that. She leaned over me, her long chestnut hair brushing against my shoulder like a silk shroud. I could smell the faint, lingering scent of the gallery's expensive floor wax on her skin. Carefully, she reached for my right hand. Her touch was light, almost tender, as she guided my thumb toward the sensor. The phone screen ignited, a brilliant white flare in the darkness that made my retinas ache. I stayed frozen, a statue in my own bed, as I felt the haptic vibration of the successful unlock. She retreated to the corner of the room, the glow of the screen illuminating her face from below. In that harsh, cold light, the woman I had loved for 7 years vanished. Her expression wasn't one of guilt or hesitation, it was a mask of clinical, high-speed efficiency. Her thumbs danced across the glass, likely authorizing the final data packets or perhaps transferring the biometric keys she needed to bypass the Aegis project's final firewall. I realized then that this was our nightly ritual. While I dreamed of our future, she was harvesting my identity to sell to the highest bidder. Every goodnight kiss was just a calibration. Every morning vitamin was just a way to ensure the sentry remained asleep. 10 minutes later, the phone was back on the nightstand, placed with architectural precision to the exact millimeter where I had left it. She slid back into bed, her body cooling against mine. As she closed her eyes, satisfied with her night's work, I stared into the darkness. The architect in me was already redrawing the plans. She thought she had used my thumb to open a door, but she had no idea that I had already changed the locks. The morning sun cut through the blinds in sharp, clinical slats, but the familiar fog in my brain felt heavier than usual. For months, I had attributed this morning lethargy to the stress of the Aegis project, a phantom architectural fatigue I thought was the price of ambition. I sat at the kitchen island, watching Claire's back as she hummed a soft, melodic tune while preparing my daily wellness stack. "You look tired again, Adrian," she said, her voice a perfect imitation of wifely concern as she slid a small ceramic ramekin toward me. Inside sat the 2 amber capsules she called memory vitamins, supposedly designed to help me focus during my high-stakes design sessions. "Your memory has been so spotty lately. I'm worried you're overworking yourself." I looked at the capsules. Yesterday, I would have swallowed them without a second thought. Today, I saw them as structural saboteurs. I waited until she turned to the sink, then palmed the pills, slipping them into the pocket of my robe with a practiced sleight of hand I didn't know I possessed. As soon as she left for her gallery, I retreated to my office and pulled a small, portable chemical testing kit from my architectural field bag, a tool I usually use to test soil acidity and concrete integrity at job sites. My hands remained steady, the cold clarity of the architect taking over. I crushed one of the amber capsules and applied the reagent. The reaction wasn't immediate, but when it happened, the color shift was undeniable. It wasn't a vitamin. The reagent turned a deep, bruised purple, indicating a potent benzodiazepine, a sedative used to treat severe insomnia or to induce twilight sleep. A chill that had nothing to do with the morning air settled in my marrow. She wasn't helping my memory, she was erasing my nights. The spotty memory she kept mentioning wasn't a symptom of stress, it was a narrative she was carefully constructing to make me doubt my own sanity. By keeping me sedated, she ensured I wouldn't wake up when she used my thumbprint. By telling me I was forgetful, she ensured I wouldn't question the digital discrepancies on my server. I looked at the crushed powder on the glass slide. This was the most intimate form of betrayal. It wasn't just a stolen blueprint or a secret meeting in a restaurant, it was a physical invasion. She had been reaching inside my mind, dimming the lights of my consciousness so she could work in the shadows. I carefully cleaned the kit and placed the remaining pill in a plastic baggie. The vitamins were the crack in the foundation I needed to prove intent. I stood up and looked at my reflection in the dark monitor. The fog was finally lifting, replaced by a cold, white-hot focus. I wasn't just going to rebuild my life, I was going to ensure that when Claire's elaborate structure finally fell, it would bury her under the weight of her own deceptions. The following morning, the house felt like a drafting table where every line was a lie and every measurement was a trap. I sat in my home office, the blue glow of my monitors illuminating the path of my counteroffensive. I wasn't just an architect today, I was a digital locksmith. I opened the Aegis project files and began the delicate process of structural modification. I designed a masterpiece of deception, a set of blueprints that looked identical to the high-security archive but contained fatal, hidden flaws. I rerouted the ventilation shafts into dead ends and placed the biometric sensors in locations that would trigger immediate silent alarms. Most importantly, I embedded a digital die pack within the metadata. The moment these files were opened on an unauthorized server, they would ping my private terminal with a GPS location and a time-stamped log of every keystroke made by the user. As I worked, I heard Claire's footsteps in the hallway. I didn't hide the screen. Instead, I leaned back, rubbing my eyes with a calculated, weary sigh. When she leaned over my shoulder, she smelled of vanilla and betrayal. "Still working on that archive, honey?" she whispered, her fingers grazing the back of my neck. "You've been so forgetful lately, maybe you should just finish it and take a break." "I think I'm finally there," I said, my voice thick with feigned exhaustion. I let my hand linger over the mouse, clicking the Save to Desktop icon with deliberate clumsiness. I made sure the file was labeled Aegis encrypted. "I'm just so drained, Claire." I left the master keys in the desktop folder because I couldn't remember the new server password. "Oh, Adrian," she cooed, her eyes darting toward the glowing icon like a hawk spotting movement in the grass. "Why don't you go lie down? I'll bring you some tea. You clearly need to sleep." I allowed her to lead me to the bedroom, playing the role of the sedated, crumbling husband for one last performance. I watched her from the doorway as she walked back toward my office, her pace quickening. I knew exactly what was happening. She was calling Thorne. She was telling him the vault was open. I lay on top of the covers, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds. My phone, hidden under the pillow, vibrated with a sharp, haptic pulse. Access granted. Home terminal. She was in. I felt a cold, jagged sense of triumph. For years, I had built structures to protect people from the outside world. Now, I was using my skills to ensure the world inside these walls finally came crashing down on the woman who had turned my home into a crime scene. The final blueprint was set. All that was left was for the foundation to fail. The following morning, I kissed Claire's cheek with a performance that would have rivaled her own. I gripped my leather weekend bag, the weight of it a necessary prop in the theater of our exit. "The firm needs me on site in Chicago for the final structural review," I lied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. "I'll be back Sunday. Don't wait up for my call. The reception at the site is terrible." "Be safe, Adrian," she murmured, her eyes already drifting toward the hallway leading to my office. "You look so much better today. The rest will do you good." I drove 3 blocks away, parked in a shadowed visitor's lot, and opened my laptop. The screen flickered to life, displaying a high-definition feed from the pinhole camera I had embedded in the smoke detector of my office months ago for security, real security. I sat in the silence of my car, a ghost architect watching his own house. Within 20 minutes, the front door chime pinged on my dashboard. Claire entered the office, followed closely by Marcus Thorne. They didn't look like lovers, they looked like business partners finalizing a hostile takeover. Thorne's sharp charcoal suit looked predatory in the dim light of my workspace. "He left the master file right here," Claire said, her voice coming through my speakers with a chilling, metallic clarity. She pointed to the glowing monitor where the Aegis Understrekan sat waiting like a baited hook. "He's completely broken, Marcus. The sedatives worked better than we planned. He can't even remember where he puts his keys half the time, let alone suspect a breach." Thorne leaned over my desk, his fingers hovering over the mouse I had touched just an hour before. "If these schematics are as detailed as you say, the bidding war is over before it begins. My firm will have the contract, and Cole will have a federal investigation to deal with. A tragic end for such a detail-oriented man." I watched as Thorne inserted a high-speed encrypted drive. My heart hammered against my ribs, not with fear, but with the cold, mathematical certainty of a successful trap. The moment he clicked copy, a silent crimson bar flashed across my laptop screen. "Tracking active. Payload delivered." "Got it," Thorne whispered, a jagged smile cutting across his face. He pulled the drive and tucked it into his breast pocket. "The handover is complete. Let's get out of here. I want this uploaded to our server by noon." Claire laughed, that same silver, melodic sound I had once associated with home. "I'll start packing my things tonight. By the time he gets back from Chicago, there won't be enough left of his reputation to save, let alone this marriage." They walked out, hand in hand, leaving my office dark and empty. I closed my laptop and gripped the steering wheel, a single sharp exhale escaping my lungs. They thought they had walked away with the crown jewels of my career. They had no idea they were carrying a digital signature that would lead the authorities straight to their doorstep within the hour. The foundation had finally collapsed, but I wasn't the one buried under the rubble. The silence in the house was no longer a cage, it was a clean slate. I stood in the center of the foyer, watching the sunset bleed amber and violet across the floor-to-ceiling glass. My phone sat on the marble counter, its screen dark after the final, jagged notification from the digital die pack I'd planted. The authorities had intercepted Marcus Thorne and Claire at the private airfield 40 miles north. They hadn't even made it to the hangar before the tracking data I provided allowed federal agents to box in their sedan. Thorne had been found with the encrypted drive in his breast pocket, while Claire was carrying a forged passport and a briefcase containing the biometric keys to my life. The Aegis project was safe, and my firm had already moved to scrub my credentials and issue new, reinforced protocols. The investigation into the corporate espionage would be long and loud, but my name was no longer on the list of suspects. I was the architect who had spotted the flaw and designed the containment. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing against the polished wood. The memory vitamins were gone, flushed away along with the fog they had created. For the first time in months, my mind was sharp, every corner of my consciousness illuminated by a cold, unwavering light. I looked at the walls I had designed, seeing them now for what they truly were, just materials. Wood, glass, and stone. They could be torn down and they could be built again. Evan Brooks had texted me an hour ago. He was moving on to a new city, leaving the restaurant business behind, but he'd sent a photo of the Rose's kitchen menu, a small reminder that truth, however painful, is the only foundation worth building on. I stopped in front of the window, looking out at the city skyline I had helped shape. I had spent my life obsessed with the integrity of structures, yet I had allowed the most important one, my own home, to be built on sand. I had been too trusting, too willing to believe in the beauty of the facade without checking the stability of the soil. But as I watched the lights of the city flicker to life, I felt a strange, quiet sense of peace. Family betrayal is a demolition you never see coming, a slow erosion of everything you held sacred. But rebuilding isn't about forgetting the cracks. It's about reinforcing them. It's about using the rubble of your past to create something unshakable. I picked up a pencil from my drafting table, the same table where Claire had stood over me just nights before, and drew a single, clean line on a fresh sheet of vellum. The old structure had collapsed, but the architect was still here. And this time, I was going to build something that could never be broken. I'm Adrian Cole. For years, I believed that if a building was aesthetically pleasing and followed the blueprints, it was safe. I applied that same logic to my marriage, and it nearly cost me everything. My career, my sanity, and my freedom. The most vital lesson I've gained from this wreckage is that an architect who only looks at the surface is a fool. You see, betrayal doesn't always sound like a slammed door or a loud argument. Sometimes, it sounds like a loving text message sent from 20 feet away. It looks like a vitamin handed to you by the person who is supposed to protect you. My flaw was that I mistrusted my own eyes because I was too in love with the structure I thought we had built. I ignored the cracks because I didn't want to admit the foundation was failing. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this. Your intuition is the most sophisticated security system you own. If the math doesn't add up, if a coincidence feels like a calculation, do not gaslight yourself into silence. Trust the architect inside you that says something is structurally unsound. I'm rebuilding now, and this time, I'm building with eyes wide open. If you want to see more stories of resilience, of uncovering the truth when the world tries to dim your light, and of finding justice in the ruins of betrayal, I'd be honored to have you on this journey with me. Subscribe to the channel and join our community. We're here to remind each other that while people may try to dismantle your life, they can never take away your ability to design a better one.